Bernice Plumtree navigated Willow Creek Academy like a whisper, her tiny form almost invisible amidst the throngs of chattering teenagers. Barely reaching 4'11", with a cascade of fiery red curls escaping her knitted hat and enormous round spectacles forever sliding down her nose, she'd perfected the art of fading into the background. Her baggy sweaters swallowed her fragile frame, and she clutched the straps of her faded satchel like a lifeline through the social jungle of high school. Unbeknownst to her peers, every Wednesday and Friday evening for the past 7 years, Bernice vanished into Madame Evangeline's dojo across town, where she had achieved the rank of Sandan in Aikido. Her mother enrolled her after some neighborhood brats stole her lunch money, but Bernice never breathed a word of her training at school. The timid girl who trembled at raised voices was the very same person who could disarm opponents twice her size and execute throws that would leave professional wrestlers speechless. Willow Creek Academy sprawled across 20 acres in rural Vermont, its grey stone buildings and overgrown ivy lending it an air of antiquated prestige. The school took pride in its renowned debate team and impressive Ivy League acceptance rates, but like every institution, it harbored shadowy recesses beyond the reach of authority. The deserted greenhouse behind the science hall, with its broken panes and overgrown vines, offered secluded spots for those seeking to torment the vulnerable. The old music room, tucked away on the 3rd floor and seldom used, became a haven for those who preferred cruelty without prying eyes. Bernice had been attending Willow Creek for 2 years, ever since her family relocated to Vermont, when her mother accepted a position at the local university. She hoped a fresh start might allow her to reinvent herself, but within the first few days, she had somehow become a target. Perhaps it was her stutter when called upon in class, or her habit of eating lunch alone while sketching mythical creatures, or simply that she appeared unlikely to retaliate. Whatever the reason, she became a magnet for students who derived pleasure from inflicting misery. Chadwick Chad. Thistlewick reigned over the school's social hierarchy with a self-assurance that stemmed from being 6'2", naturally charismatic, and gifted with a winning smile that led teachers to believe he was a model student, despite all evidence to the contrary. His dark brown hair was always impeccably groomed, and he wore his varsity jacket like a badge of honor, emblazoned with patches commemorating his status as captain of the lacrosse team and student body president. To most adults, Chad was the epitome of an all-American teenager. To students like Bernice, he was something far more sinister. Chad was usually accompanied by his 2 loyal henchmen, Reginald "Reggie" Perkins, a burly rugby player whose sense of humor revolved around physical pranks, and Alistair Finch, whose cutting remarks could reduce anyone to tears with devastating accuracy. The trio had honed their routine over years, knowing precisely how far they could push without incurring serious consequences. They were cunning bullies, which made them far more dangerous than the obvious thugs who eventually got suspended. The initial incident occurred during Bernice's freshman year when she inadvertently spilled her cranberry juice on Chad while hurrying to art history. Her art supplies tumbled to the floor, and as she bent to gather them, Chad deliberately smeared his muddy boot across her sketchbook, ruining several intricate drawings. "Watch it, short stack," he said with his disarming smile, while Alistair quipped about how maybe she needed a seeing eye dog. Reggie accidentally knocked her pencil case across the hallway, scattering its contents like fallen leaves. The entire episode lasted less than a minute, but it established the pattern that would define the next 2 years of Bernice's life. Initially, the incidents were infrequent and relatively minor. A shove in the corridor that sent her sprawling against lockers, comments about her hand-me-down clothes or outlandish drawings delivered just loudly enough for nearby students to overhear and giggle. Her homemade granola bar getting accidentally knocked out of her hand in the cafeteria, leaving her to pick up the crumbs while fighting back tears. Each incident was carefully calculated to be dismissible, explainable as an accident or harmless teasing if any teacher inquired. Bernice's initial reaction was precisely what they expected. She silently endured the humiliation, cleaned up their messes, and tried even harder to become invisible. She convinced herself that resisting would only worsen the situation, that attracting attention would escalate matters beyond her control. More importantly, she had promised her mother, when she enrolled her in Aikido, that she would never use her training to harm anyone unless her life was in imminent danger. Aikido is about harmony and redirecting energy, her mother had said. It's not about winning fights, it's about finding a peaceful resolution. Those words echoed in her mind every time Chad and his cronies tested her limits, even as a part of her yearned to show them exactly what she was capable of. Ms. Albright, her history teacher, noticed occasional scratches on Bernice's hands and arms and asked if everything was all right at home. Mr. Abernathy, the music teacher, observed how Bernice flinched whenever students stood too close during group rehearsals. But when pressed for details, Bernice always offered plausible explanations. She was clumsy, she bruised easily, she simply preferred her own company. The adults wanted to believe her because the alternative meant acknowledging a problem happening under their noses, and intervention meant paperwork and uncomfortable conversations with popular students' parents. Other students noticed too, but their reactions varied. Some felt genuine compassion for Bernice, but were too afraid of becoming targets themselves to intervene. Others found perverse amusement in watching someone else absorb negative attention they might otherwise receive. A few seemed to derive comfort from knowing they weren't at the very bottom of the social pecking order. The bystander effect thrived in Willow Creek's hallways, where everyone learned that the safest response to witnessing cruelty was to look the other way and quicken their pace. As sophomore year progressed, the incidents escalated. Chad and his friends grew bolder, perhaps sensing that Bernice would never report them or retaliate. They began timing their encounters for maximum humiliation. During the crowded lunch rush, Reggie would accidentally trip Bernice as she carried her tray, sending her vegetable stew and apple juice splattering across the floor. The entire cafeteria would turn to stare, some snickering, others wincing in vicarious embarrassment, while Bernice knelt to clean up the mess with flimsy paper napkins that disintegrated in pools of stew and juice. The deserted greenhouse became their preferred venue for verbal abuse. The echoing acoustics amplified their laughter and taunts throughout the space, yet the location was secluded enough that no teachers ever witnessed their encounters. They discovered that Bernice's route to 7th period botany class took her through this area, and they began adjusting their schedules to coincide with hers. Alistair would make snide remarks about her appearance, her clothes, her family's modest income based on her thrift store outfits and patched-up boots. Reggie would offer unsolicited advice on her appearance, loudly wondering if she had ever considered cosmetic surgery or a new wardrobe, or perhaps just dropping out of school altogether. Chad would play the voice of reason, occasionally telling his friends to take it easy while doing nothing to actually stop them. Throughout it all, Bernice persevered. She developed strategies for survival, alternative routes through the school, careful timing of movements, and a mental shield that she donned each morning before entering Willow Creek's front doors. She immersed herself in her studies, maintaining a 4.0 GPA that placed her at the top of her class, as if academic achievement could somehow protect her from social cruelty. Her teachers praised her dedication and work ethic, never suspecting that school had become an ordeal rather than a place of learning. At home, Bernice continued her Aikido training with renewed focus. Madame Evangeline noticed her heightened concentration during practice sessions, the way she channeled her emotions into precise movements. She had been training students for over 40 years and recognized the signs of someone grappling with anger and frustration. But when she gently inquired about her life outside the dojo, Bernice deflected with the same skill she used to deflect strikes during practice. She was fine, school was fine, everything was fine. The breaking point occurred on a Thursday in October, when crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and cider, and the cross-country season was drawing to a close. Bernice had been looking forward to this particular day because Penelope Penny Hawthorne, a new student who had arrived at the beginning of the semester, had invited her to collaborate on a project for their advanced history class. Penny was everything Bernice wasn't: confident, gregarious, effortlessly stylish in a way that made other girls simultaneously admire and envy her. She had striking blonde hair that framed her face perfectly, and hazel eyes that seemed to see right through you. More importantly, Penny had shown Bernice genuine kindness during their brief interactions, complimenting her artwork without being prompted and defending her when Alistair made particularly nasty remarks within earshot. They had arranged to meet in the library during study hall, but Bernice first needed to collect her history notes from her locker. She was mentally reviewing the causes of the French Revolution as she spun the combination dial, completely absorbed in thoughts of Robespierre and the Reign of Terror. She didn't notice Chad, Reggie, and Alistair approaching until it was too late to escape. "Well, well, what have we here?" Chad's voice had that particular tone that made Bernice's stomach clench with anxiety. "I heard a rumor that our little gnome has been making friends." Bernice clutched her history notebook against her chest and tried to slip past them, but Reggie moved to block her path. The hallway was mostly deserted since study hall had already begun, which meant fewer witnesses, but also less chance of teacher intervention. "I heard you're working with the new girl," Alistair added with a sneer. "Penny, what's her name? Popular girl. Way out of your league, don't you think?" "She's just helping me with the project," Bernice mumbled, her voice barely audible. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, hoping that submission would make them lose interest and move on. "Maybe we should give Penny a warning," Chad suggested, his tone casual but his eyes calculating. "Let her know what kind of person she's associating with. Wouldn't want her to get the wrong impression about our school's standards." The threat was clear, and Bernice felt a chill settle in her stomach. It was one thing for them to target her, but the thought of them turning their attention to Penny because of their association filled her with a different kind of dread. "Please," Bernice whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Just leave her alone." "Oh, now she's begging," Alistair said with glee. "This is even better than I thought. She's got a little crush." The bell signaling the end of study hall rang, and students began streaming back into the hallways. Bernice thought she was saved, that they would disperse to their respective classes and leave her alone. But as Penny appeared at the end of the hallway, walking toward them with her history textbook in hand and a friendly smile on her face, Bernice realized the situation was about to get much worse. "Penny!" Alistair called out cheerfully, waving her over. "Perfect timing. We were just talking about you." Penny approached with the kind of confidence that came from never having been the target of systematic cruelty. She smiled at Chad and his friends with genuine warmth, not yet recognizing the predatory gleam in their eyes. "Hi," she said, then turned to Bernice. "Ready for our study session? I brought my notes on the storming of the Bastille." "Actually," Chad said, stepping slightly between Penny and Bernice, "we were just discussing whether our little friend here had mentioned her reputation around school." "That's not true," Penny said firmly, when Reggie chimed in with comments about Bernice being the school's charity case. "Bernice is incredibly talented, and she's been nothing but welcoming to me since I got here." "Talented, sure," Alistair agreed with mock sincerity. "But talent doesn't make up for everything else, you know. The way she dresses, the way she acts all shy and withdrawn. Most people think she's kind of odd, actually." The warning was subtle but unmistakable. Associate with Bernice and risk becoming a target yourself. It was the same calculation that dozens of other students had made over the years, and Bernice watched Penny's face as she processed the social dynamics of high school survival. "Besides," Reggie added, reaching out suddenly and snatching Bernice's glasses right off her face. "Maybe Shorty here could learn something from your fashion sense. These are much nicer frames." Penny squinted in sudden blurriness, reaching instinctively for her glasses. "Hey, give those back." But Reggie was already tossing them to Alistair, who caught them with a grin. "Let's see how they look on our friend here," he said, moving toward Bernice. "Stop it," Penny said, more forcefully now. "Give me my glasses back right now." "Or what?" Alistair asked, holding the glasses just out of Bernice's reach as she stood frozen between them. "You'll tell the headmaster? For what? Playing keep away?" Bernice could see Penny squinting, trying to focus on what was happening around her. Without her glasses, Penny's confident demeanor had shifted to something more uncertain, more vulnerable. "Come on, Shorty," Reggie taunted, holding the glasses higher. "Jump for them. Show your new friend how athletic you are." "Please," Bernice said again, hating herself for begging but seeing no other option. "Just give them back." "Say please like you mean it," Alistair demanded. "Get on your knees and beg properly." The hallway was filling up with students now as the next class period approached. Some hurried past with their eyes averted, while others slowed down to watch the spectacle. "This is ridiculous," Penny said, her voice stronger now despite her obvious disadvantage. She started moving toward Alistair, reaching for her glasses. "Give them back right now." "Whoa there," Chad said, stepping in front of Penny and placing his hands on her shoulders to stop her progress. The touch was fleeting and could easily be interpreted as trying to prevent a collision, but Bernice saw Penny flinch slightly at the unexpected contact. That flinch was the last straw. In that instant, Bernice saw her own future reflected in Penny's face. She saw the gradual erosion of self-esteem, the careful calculations about which routes to avoid, the slow transformation from outgoing newcomer to wary victim. She saw Penny learning to make herself smaller, quieter, more invisible, all to avoid the attention of boys who found amusement in others' fear. Something solidified in Bernice's mind with perfect clarity. She had spent 2 years telling herself that her Aikido training was for harmony and self-discipline, that violence was never the answer, that rising above their level was the moral choice. But watching Chad's hands on Penny's shoulders, seeing the predatory glint in Alistair's eyes as he held the glasses just out of reach, she realized that her inaction wasn't noble, it was enabling. By refusing to defend herself, she had allowed them to perfect their techniques on her before turning them on someone else. The hallway noise seemed to recede into background hum as Bernice made her decision. Madame Evangeline had taught her that Aikido was about protecting yourself and others from harm. She had also taught her that sometimes the most harmonious response was the one that stopped a threat before it could escalate. "Give her the glasses back," Bernice said, her voice carrying a newfound authority that made Alistair look at her with surprise. "Excuse me?" Alistair scoffed. "Did the mouse just squeak?" "I said give her the glasses back," Bernice repeated, stepping forward. Her posture had changed imperceptibly, her weight shifting slightly forward in a stance that looked relaxed but would allow for swift movement in any direction. "Or what?" Reggie asked, moving to flank her. "You'll tell the headmaster on us?" Bernice looked at Penny, who was still squinting in their direction, trying to follow the exchange by sound. She thought about all the students who had witnessed her humiliation over the years, who had learned through her example that bullies faced no consequences for their actions. "Or I'll take them back," she said simply. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Bernice could see the precise moment when Chad, Reggie, and Alistair realized that something fundamental had changed. The quiet girl who had endured their abuse for 2 years was looking at them with steady eyes that held no hint of fear. "You'll take them back?" Chad repeated, as if the concept was so foreign he needed to hear it again to believe it. "That's right," Bernice said, taking another step forward. Alistair held the glasses higher, smirking. "I'd like to see you try, Shorty." What happened next transpired in less than 4 seconds, but to the students watching in the hallway, it seemed to unfold in slow motion. Bernice moved forward with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years practicing the same techniques until they became second nature. Her right hand shot out to grasp Alistair's wrist, not with the desperate flailing of someone reaching for an object, but with the controlled precision of someone who understood leverage and joint manipulation. Alistair's confident smirk faltered as he felt the pressure on his wrist, a specific kind of discomfort that indicated his opponent knew exactly which pressure points to target. Before he could react, Bernice's left hand snatched the glasses while her right hand applied just enough pressure to make him release them instinctively. "What the hell?" Reggie lunged forward, but stopped when Bernice turned to face him. She handed the glasses to Penny with gentle care, her movement so smooth it looked choreographed. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft with genuine concern. Penny slipped her glasses back on and blinked as the world snapped back into focus. When she looked at Bernice, her expression held surprise, gratitude, and something that might have been admiration. "I'm fine," Penny said. "Thank you." The simple exchange seemed to enrage Alistair, who was rubbing his wrist and glaring at Bernice with newfound animosity. "You think you're tough now? You think grabbing someone's wrist makes you some kind of badass?" "I think taking someone's glasses makes you a bully," Bernice replied calmly. "And I think it stops now." "It stops when we say it stops," Chad said, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "Actually," Bernice said, meeting his gaze directly for what felt like the first time in years, "it stops now." The hallway had grown quieter as more students stopped to watch. Some had their phones out, sensing that whatever was happening might be worth recording. "You know what your problem is?" Chad said, stepping closer to Bernice. "You don't understand your place here. You don't understand how things work." "I understand perfectly," Bernice replied. "You pick on people you think won't fight back, and when someone finally does, you can't handle it." Reggie moved to Bernice's left while Alistair circled to her right, and she recognized the formation immediately. It was the same triangular positioning that predators use to isolate and intimidate prey, designed to make the target feel surrounded and overwhelmed. 2 years ago, it would have worked. But the person standing in this hallway was not the same girl who had first cowered under their attention. "Last chance," Chad said, his voice laced with the false reasonableness that bullies used before escalating to violence. "Apologize for putting your hands on Alistair, and we'll forget this whole thing happened." Bernice glanced around at the students watching from what they thought was a safe distance. She saw the mixture of anticipation and fear on their faces, the way they held their phones ready to capture whatever happened next. "No," she said simply. Alistair made the first move, lunging forward with the kind of wild swing that came from anger rather than training. To someone who had spent years practicing defensive techniques, his approach was telegraphed and clumsy. Bernice sidestepped smoothly, using his momentum against him, and applied a basic wrist lock that sent him sprawling to the floor with a thud that echoed through the hallway. The sound of Alistair hitting the linoleum seemed to galvanize Reggie, who charged at Bernice from her left side. But Madame Evangeline had drilled her extensively on dealing with multiple attackers, and she was ready for him. A simple leg sweep caught Reggie's ankle at precisely the right moment, sending him tumbling across the floor in a tangle of limbs. Chad stared at his two friends on the ground, then at Bernice, who stood calmly in the center of the hallway with her satchel still properly positioned on her shoulders. She wasn't breathing hard, wasn't even disheveled. "How?" Chad asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. 7 years of Aikido," Bernice replied matter-of-factly. "I just never saw the point in mentioning it before." The showdown came 2 days later, after school in the parking lot, where students gathered to wait for buses or walk home. Chad felt compelled to reassert his dominance with a larger audience, blocking Bernice's path with several other students who usually remained on the periphery of their activities. "If you want a fair fight," Bernice said when they accused her of using underhanded tactics. "Then let's have one. Just you and me, Chad. No friends, no cheap shots, no excuses." The crowd murmured with excitement. Someone shouted, "Fight!" and others took up the chant. Chad looked around at the faces surrounding them, recognizing that he was trapped by his own image. To back down now would be to admit that his power had always been an illusion. "Fine," he said, shrugging off his varsity jacket. "But when I put you in the hospital, don't come crying about how unfair it was." The crowd formed a loose circle around them, everyone pulling out phones to record what they anticipated would be a legendary moment in Willow Creek history. Bernice could see Penny near the edge of the circle, her expression concerned but supportive. Chad moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a physical altercation. His first punch was a powerful right hook aimed at Bernice's head, the kind of haymaker that would have ended most fights before they really began. But Bernice wasn't most people. She had spent years training against opponents larger and stronger than herself, learning to use evasion and technique to overcome physical disadvantages. She slipped Chad's punch with a subtle movement of her head, letting his fist whistle past her ear, close enough to feel the breeze of its passage. The miss threw Chad off balance, and Bernice capitalized on his momentary vulnerability to land a precise strike to his abdomen. It wasn't a devastating blow, but it was enough to double him over and force him to stagger back, gasping for air. Bernice moved like smoke, flowing around his attacks with an economy of motion that made her look almost languid compared to his increasingly desperate efforts. Every few seconds, she would dart in with a quick strike of her own, a palm heel strike to his chest, a kick to his shin, a precise punch to his shoulder that temporarily numbed his arm. While Chad grew more winded and frantic with each exchange, Bernice remained composed and focused, barely breathing hard despite the intense physical exertion. "Stand still and fight!" Chad yelled in frustration, lunging at her in a tackle that might have worked against an untrained opponent. Bernice sidestepped deftly and used his momentum to help him crash into the chain-link fence that bordered the parking lot. The metallic clang of his impact silenced the crowd momentarily, and when Chad turned around, there was blood trickling from a gash on his forehead where he had struck the fence. "I am fighting," Bernice replied calmly. "This is what real fighting looks like." What ensued was a demonstration rather than a fight. Bernice moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent thousands of hours honing her craft, while Chad flailed with the desperate energy of someone watching his reputation disintegrate in real time. She controlled the distance between them effortlessly, staying just out of range of his attacks while landing her own strikes with surgical accuracy. The end came when Chad, driven by desperation and wounded pride, picked up a rock from the parking lot and hurled it at Bernice's head. It was a dangerous escalation that crossed the line from schoolyard brawl into potential assault with a deadly weapon. Bernice ducked beneath the projectile and closed the distance between them in 2 swift steps. Her response was immediate and decisive, a sweeping throw that caught Chad squarely off balance and sent him hurtling backward to land hard on the asphalt. This time, he didn't get up immediately. The parking lot was utterly silent now, except for the sound of Chad's ragged breathing. He lay on his back, staring up at the sky, while Bernice stood over him with her fists still raised in a defensive posture. "Stay down," she said softly, but her voice carried clearly in the stillness. For a moment, it appeared the fight was over. Chad seemed defeated, his chest heaving as he struggled to regain his breath. The crowd waited to see if Bernice would press her advantage, if she would deliver the kind of brutal finishing move that would solidify her victory and his humiliation. But as Chad struggled to sit up, as she saw the genuine fear in his eyes for the first time, Bernice made a different choice. Instead of striking again, she stepped back and lowered her hands. "It's over," she said, addressing not just Chad, but the entire crowd that had gathered to watch. "We're done here." A week after the parking lot incident, Bernice was surprised to find Chad waiting by her locker after school. He stood at a respectful distance, his hands shoved deep in his pockets and his customary confidence replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like remorse. "I wanted to apologize," Chad said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "For everything. For the past 2 years, for what we did to you, for being a jerk. I don't really have an excuse for it. I just thought it was funny, I guess. I thought it made me look cool or tough or whatever." He shook his head. "I never really considered how it affected you." "What changed?" Bernice asked. Chad was silent for a long moment, staring at the floor. "Watching that video, seeing myself get beat up by someone half my size, seeing how pathetic I looked, but also seeing how you could have kept going and chose not to. You could have really hurt me when I was down, but you didn't." "Harmony should always be the ultimate goal," Bernice said, "but sometimes it's the only language bullies understand." "I understand now," Chad said, "and I'm sorry, really sorry. I know it doesn't undo anything, but I wanted you to know." Bernice studied his face for a moment longer, then nodded. "Apology accepted. But it's not just about me, Chad. It's about everyone you and your friends have victimized over the years, and it's about ensuring it doesn't happen again." "It won't," Chad said quickly. "As far as I'm concerned, that whole thing is over. Finished." As Chad walked away, Bernice reflected on how strange it felt to have closure after so long. The boy who had made her life miserable for 2 years had just apologized with what seemed like genuine sincerity. Penny appeared at her elbow, having waited at a discreet distance during the conversation. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Different than I imagined it would," Bernice admitted. "I spent so long being angry at him, and now I mostly just feel sorry for him." "Think about it," Bernice said as they walked toward the exit together. "He spent 2 years thinking his value came from making other people feel small. What kind of person must you be to find amusement in someone else's pain?" As they stepped out into the afternoon sunshine, Bernice felt a sense of liberation that had been absent from her life for longer than she cared to acknowledge. The school that had once felt like a prison now felt like just a building where she happened to spend her days acquiring knowledge that would help her create the future she envisioned. Looking back at Willow Creek as they walked away, Bernice thought about all the students still inside those walls who were fighting their own battles against bullies and indifference. She hoped that her story would reach some of them, would demonstrate to them that powerlessness was often a choice, and that sometimes the most pivotal battle was the one you finally decided to wage. She had learned that standing up for yourself didn't transform you into a bully in return, as long as you remembered to extend your hand to help others up, rather than using your strength to keep them down. The distinction between a victim and a survivor, she realized, was sometimes simply the willingness to say no and mean it, regardless of the consequences. And sometimes, if you were incredibly fortunate, standing up for yourself showed others that they could stand up too, creating waves of courage that spread far beyond your own small sphere of influence. 30,424 characters.